Hello and welcome to the MBV podcast. Thanks for joining us. My name is Jeremy Gardner and this podcast is hosted by mindbodyvortex.com. This is a place where we venture deep into the mysteries of the mind and the complexities of the human experience. We connect with practitioners and professionals in mind, body health, science, consciousness, meditation, yoga, and just some really fun and fascinating people that can help us illuminate the way we think about the experience of life. My goal in these discussions is to extract the wisdom, stories, and actionable information that we can take back into the way we perceive ourselves and the way we interact with the world around us in more of a positive and productive way. I want to talk about things like why we are starting to hear more about the ancient practice of meditation being strategically implemented by professional athletes, high performers, musicians, artists, and even CEOs of some of the world's largest companies. I am always curious to find out more about why this deceptively simple practice can produce so many astonishing life-altering benefits. Our guest today is a perfect example of the evolution of meditation and how ancient philosophies and modern science can be integrated in order to unveil some pretty meaningful results for people living in today's world. Dr. Richard Miller is a meditation teacher and the founder of iRest, which is a research-based approach to meditation based on ancient mindful awareness techniques to regulate and recover from emotional trauma associated with stress. This fascinating application was developed by Richard and guided by the philosophies of Yoga Nidra, among many other ancient teachings and principles that we will be discussing in this conversation. iRest has been used to treat soldiers returning from combat in Iraq and Afghanistan who were suffering with severe post-traumatic stress disorder. These treatments, based on meditation, were able to produce some amazing results in helping these veterans deal with their symptoms of Ptsd and ultimately help them heal back into their natural state of existence and being. I've really been drawn into Richard's work over the last couple of years, and what's very intriguing about the work of Dr. Richard is not only the Eastern influences of meditation philosophy that have driven these protocols, but also the science that has been implemented to track these results. Today, iRest is being taught by over 500 certified teachers and even used in clinical treatments of addiction, depression, stress, anxiety. And not only has iRest made its way into some schools, but this approach has been implemented in hospice and homeless shelters with some pretty interesting results. In this conversation, Richard shares his personal story and what inspired his journey towards the development of iRest. This discussion is full of practical information about dealing with the emotions that we all struggle with, and how the simplicity of meditation is at the core of all healing if we can allow ourselves to open up to the process and be willing to go within ourselves. We will also be getting into the science of meditation and many of the experiences Richard has had working with other people. Some of these stories are absolutely fascinating and valuable, so I am really excited to share this conversation with you. I invite you to come join us. Let's get into the discussion. Richard, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Great. So I've really been drawn into your work over the last couple of years and really fascinated with the research and the modern applications of meditation that you've been developing with some really amazing results. I'm always very curious and interested with how you're able to combine traditional clinical psychology with ancient philosophies and Eastern schools of meditation, for example. So today I really want to get into the research-based practices associated with iRest, as well as the neuroscience and some of the work you've been doing more recently. But I was thinking maybe we could work our way up to that point, because I know that when it comes to your clinical work in meditation and integrative treatment, for you this actually stems much deeper into the true essence and origins of these ancient practices. So where did the influence of yoga and meditation philosophy come into the equation for you?
It came in quite early, 1970, when I took my first yoga class, actually as a way of meeting people in San Francisco because I was new to the city. The class ended up being taught in silence, so I never met anybody, but I met myself and started to really investigate these extraordinary teachings, because in that first class I had a transformative moment where I would say my life took a 360 degree or 180 degree turn. And shortly after, I was volunteering in a clinic to begin learning the art of psychotherapy, and I met a mentor who happened to be just arriving from the Far East, where she grew up, And so she brought into my direct experience right away both the teachings of yoga, the Far Eastern teachings of Buddhism. We were investigating the teachings of Judeo-Christian lineages, and I also met a Taoist teacher right around the same time. So I had an incredible early immersion in all things Eastern as well as Western, because we were also looking at the teachings of psychotherapy from the psychodynamics of Freud, the dynamics of Jung, the existential philosophies of Rollo May, Eric Fromm, R.D. Laing. So I had quite an interesting immersion and an integration right from the beginning when I was studying both psychology and yoga. So I was going back and forth actually from yoga to psychology and psychology to yoga. They were an integrated facet for me. And one of the things I came to learn early on was Western psychology was not really informed very much by the Eastern teachings, and the Eastern teachings weren't informed by psychology. So emotions and intellectual kind of understandings of how do we work with thoughts, beliefs, emotions weren't really part of the meditation that I was learning. And on the Western side, there wasn't really an understanding of transcendence. Mm-hmm. So I loved it how right from the beginning, this integration, I was not doing a spiritual bypass and I wasn't doing a psychological bypass. It was an integration of both perspectives right from the beginning.
Wow. So in those early philosophies that you were learning, what was it that drew you kind of deeper into the philosophical aspects of meditation, for example?
At its root was the suffering, both within myself, having grown up in a Western culture where I really was enculturated into a sense of separation, which is wonderful for social relationships, but not very good for intra-psychic knowing ourself. So the Eastern teachings really invited me into a deeper communication connection with myself, as did the Western teachings. So I began to go to the bookstores and look at how were people integrating these two perspectives. So Alan Watts back in the 60s and 70s was very instrumental. The teachings of Yogananda, Vivekananda, Satchidananda. So I was really exploring both on a Western side, again, as I was saying, the psychodynamics of Freud, Jung, and the existentialists, Rollo May and others. And then on the Eastern side, these teachings of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, Sankhya, and then I wound into Advaita, the books written by Shankaracharya, the teachings of Ramana Maharshi, and then later on, the incredible teachings that come out of the Kashmir tradition, especially with a fellow by the name of Lakshman Ju. I really loved how each of these were, from their own perspective, teaching me, but then my mentor was helping me weave them together.
So, and weaving them together into kind of was it a meditation practice that you were doing, spiritual practice?
I was learning meditation. I was sitting in both yoga tradition, taking classes in meditation, as well as the more physical aspects, hatha yoga, pranayama. I was sitting in Zen, so going to retreats, 5-day, 6-day sesshins, they're called. I was doing weekly classes in Mahayana Buddhism, and my Taoist master and I began to study together. And I was learning Chinese medicine, the principles of Taoist yoga from him. And just, I was in these deep pools, many, many wells, digging deep into each one of them. And at first they felt very separate, and then they started coming together. So I kept coming back to my yogic roots and eventually really brought all of those wells together and really inquiring into what are the roots of yoga and how might they inform all the other teachings.
Yeah.
Which really helped me synthesize all that I had been learning into one kind of stream. And early on, I had been exposed to the teachings of what are called Yoga Nidra, and it provided me a wonderful structure for hanging off all the teachings that I was learning from the psychodynamic schools of Western psychology to the Eastern schools of Sankhya, Patanjali, Advaita, and Kashmir Shaivism. So I was able to have a structure to integrate all these different teachings into what I would call a simple structure or package that would help me understand whatever I was reading, whether it was an Upanishad, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Ramana Maharshi.
Yeah, wow, that's very fascinating. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about kind of how it integrates into psychology and how you were able to kind of make the connection there. But I want to kind of just stay a little second on some of these Eastern traditions that you're referring to. So more specifically, what are these schools then? What were you learning kind of in terms of, you mentioned Kashmir,
Shaivism.
Yeah, Shaivism, like some non-dualistic approaches there. So what
Well,
were you learning?
Sankhya is the basic philosophy that informs the teachings of yoga and specifically Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So I think of Sankhya as it gave me a good grounding in the philosophical view, and then Patanjali, basically, I came to understand as 196 exercises, practices, we might say, for realizing this philosophical view of Sankhya, which led me to a deep understanding of all the changing phenomena of body, senses, mind, and an underlying changeless essence we might call ourselves as a witnessing presence. Then I leapt into Advaita, which took it a step further, which really helped me see that everything in a way that I see is a projection coming out of my mind. I see you according to my views, my perspective, my perceptions, but they're my perceptions. So I realize that everything I see, I have a particular view that's unique to me as an expression of life. So it helps a deeper integration, we might say, of understanding an underlying essence that we all share in common. The teachings of Kashmir Shaivism gave me an even deeper perspective because yoga and Advaita are often more in the monastic tradition. We kind of step out of life. Kashmir, non-dualism, invites us to fully step into our life, our relationships, our work, our children, our peers, our friends. So I found a beautiful entryway as a Westerner who really feels deeply moved to be in life. Here were exquisite teachings which were helping me not just view myself as a kind of a separate observer or witnessing presence, but fully engaged in life itself. And Kashmir Shaivism offered me both a kind of a philosophical view, which comes out of what is known as the Shiva Sutras textbook, but it also gave me another book, the Vijnana Bhairav, which are 112 ways to practically realize these teachings in everyday life through our conversation, through eating, through moving about in the world. Very practical practices for using the breath, the body, the senses to realize these fundamental teachings that the East brings to our plate. On the Western side, I was diving deeply into the teachings and writings of people like Socrates, Aristotle, Plato from the Western early perspective, and then looking at how Freud propagated these teachings, then Jung, then Assagioli in psychosynthesis, which introduced a more spiritual side as Jung was doing, and then got very heavily involved with the existentialists, or especially R.D. Laing, and the mentor that I was having had actually studied with an associate of R.D. Laing and Erich Fromm from the humanistic teachings. So it was a wonderful, really philosophical view, but also deeply embedded in embodying practices, both from the Eastern perspective, Patanjali, and especially Kashmir Shaivism and the meditations that I was getting involved in Zen, Mahayana Buddhism, and Advaita, and then the practical movements of how do you use psychology to become friends with your own sense of self, personality, ego.
Yeah.
The Eastern kind of introduces us a view of kill the ego, the Western befriend it. And so as I brought these together, I realized it's not about killing the ego or transcending the ego, it's about befriending it. Mm-hmm. It's a genetically engineered aspect of ourselves. So how do we become friends with ourselves at a very integrated human level? And then how do we come to these deeper understandings around transcendence? So I've come to view the practice now from 4 phases. First is we're just becoming a good human being. We're learning how to function as an integrated, healthy sense of self, friends with our emotions and our thoughts psychologically. So we can basically say, I know how to do life as a human being, social human being. And then the transcendent practices that help us realize a deeper spiritual aspect of ourselves that's interconnected with the entire cosmos and the underlying essence that we all share in common. And then how do we re-embody back into our humanness and take these practices into the world, into our relationships and our work in the world as a fully, I would say, functioning human being.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very well said, because as these new philosophies come out in the Western side, kind of adding pieces to the puzzle from the Eastern teachings that you were learning. So for you personally, what was the experience of going within yourself when you were first kind of exploring the spiritual aspect of going within?
When I first came to these teachings, looking back, I had a great deal of conflict within myself. I had been raised in a culture in a particular family that separated me from a lot of my emotions. Anger wasn't okay. It wasn't okay to, move in the world in certain ways because of the conditioning that I had learned from my culture and family. The Eastern and the psychological teachings really helped me resolve that sense of inner suffering. I had been carrying a kind of a depression within myself for many years. While I could, look good on paper from the outside, and everybody who knows me from back then said, oh, you seem so together. But inside, I felt very fragmented, isolated, and quite a bit of suffering, looking for how do I resolve all this inner conflict. When I first met the teachings of yoga, I really had in that first class a transformative moment where I felt deeply connected to myself, to the universe. The sense of depression dropped away, and I really felt this sense of integration. And so it spurred within me a deep curiosity. 1, what just happened? 2, what were these teachings I had just engaged? And 3, because the experience only lasted for a few days or a few weeks, and then I went back to my old conditioning. How can I awaken this quality of peace and well-being in myself that I discovered in that moment? So it took me years of study and meditation to come back, I would say, and fully embody that sense of deep peace and equanimity that I now carry within me day to day, moment to moment. But I would say it was initially my own suffering. And then as I got involved with psychology and working with the suffering of the people around me and seeing that just the Western technique of psychotherapy only went so far, it felt like it could have a certain success rate. But ultimately, it was helping people kind of settle for a kind of a okay, neurotic kind of way of living life where they felt basically okay, but still not okay. The spiritual teachings really brought to me a deeper sense of okayness that I came to realize is unbreakable, is within all of us innately, and showed me not just how to access it, but then to pass it on to people so that right from the beginning of the work I now do with anybody, I help as quickly as possible to find within themselves a really deep embodied sense of unbreakable well-being that has been here all along. They just lost touch with it. Once they really feel that, then it's easy, or relatively easy, to begin to address what does feel broken and does need healing. So the Eastern teachings, I think, helps us realize something within ourselves that's equanimous, deeply at peace, unbreakable health, resiliency, and well-being. And then the Western teachings help us integrate a healthy sense of egoic self. And then the Eastern teachings bring in that additional piece of a sense of connectedness with the entire universe.
Is that something in our evolutionary path as human beings, we've kind of lost touch with that equanimity, that sense of connectedness? Where has that gone for us?
Well, I've also over the years been deeply curious about our biology, our genetics, and how we've come to be assembled as human beings. And what I discovered along the way is we're all born with this innate sense of wholeness, but around 18 months of age, as our nervous system comes online more fully, around 18 months of age, this sense of self as a separate human being begins to come online, and it's nourished by our culture, our family. So we really take on a deep-seated feeling of separation, and this innate sense of wholeness and non-separation moves into the background, and most people lose touch with it. What I came to recognize was the moment we begin to lose touch with this innate quality of wholeness, we begin to feel that something's not wrong. Something is wrong and not right. And the ego picks it up, and instead of saying there's something wrong or there's something not here that's right, it says there's something wrong with me and something that's not good about me. And now we're on the search for, how do I heal me? Psychology tries to heal the me, but still keeps in place this sense of separation, which will always then give rise to, even though we may feel fully functional as a human being and individuated, something still stinks here. Something still doesn't feel healed or whole. The Eastern teachings then help us reawaken. So they call it awakening. We're awakening back to this innate sense so that ultimately we are really now embodying our potential as a fully integrated human being. We can feel our sense of separate self. That's innate and genetically engineered as this sense of ego, and something that transcends the ego, so that in the moment we can both recognize, say, you over there as a separate individual, me over here as a separate individual, and we're both unique as personalities, and yet there's an underlying essence that connects us at another level where we're not separate. And what I've come to appreciate about that is, because people would say, well, why would I want that? Well, what it does is it allows us to live as separate human beings and relate socially and enjoy our differences, but it doesn't allow us to do violence or war, because we realize that the person fundamentally over there is just an essence of myself. So it doesn't make sense to go to war or do violence with myself. So as we start to fall into old patterns of conditioning or deep conflict or even violence, we realize that doesn't work. It's really taking us away from this underlying connectedness. And so that underlying thread of connectedness keeps bringing us back to resolve our differences. So then at the end of the day, we celebrate difference, we enjoy each other, but no interest in doing violence or war with one another. And if we all knew this, there wouldn't be any wars going on. There'd still be conflict, but no war.
Yeah. And that's that's kind of like the core of a lot of the amazing work you're doing is, from what I understand, it's the baseline is we all have that within ourselves, and it's the journey getting back there. And the ego plays a large role in that inner conflict, but we also have all these emotions circulating around. So what have you learned about emotions and learning how to regulate our emotions and come to terms with them?
Yeah, great question. I've come to view it in a very simple manner. Emotions body sensations, thoughts, the images we have, I relate to them all now as messengers. They're here to help us move through life. When we learn early on to repress certain emotions, certain thoughts, certain qualities about ourselves, we lose touch with them as messengers, and we can often come to view our emotions as enemies we're trying to overcome. Yoga and the practices of meditation help us, on the other hand, reunite with them, befriend them, come into right relationship. And as we come into right relationship, every emotion, sensation, or thought that arrives, we can have a kind of an inquiry with them as if they were a guest in our house, and we're saying to them, what brings you here? And what action are you asking me to take in my life that by taking it, I would feel in harmony both with myself, the people around me, and the world? So emotions are very helpful agents. And the teachings, both from psychology and in the Eastern perspective then, are helping us learn how to welcome our emotions, be with them, respond to them, so we have a real regulated internal system where we feel within ourselves authentic, spontaneous, safe with ourself, and our willingness to give voice and be heard, as well as to be seen and see ourselves. Where I think most people, if they say to themselves, I'm safe with myself, they'll quickly see where they're not, where they say yes when they should be saying no, when they might betray themselves by doing some action that doesn't work. So our emotions then help us locate within ourselves, as do our body sensations, what I've come to respect as our own inner compass or inner gyroscope. And we all have within us this kind of innate meter that helps us see when we're going away from ourselves, and that makes us feel kind of something's not right, or we're going off course, or some kind of feeling that's suffering. And then the actions, and when we take them and they bring us back, they feel right. They make us feel we're back on course. So simplistically, emotions, thoughts, body sensations, they're here to help us move through our life in a well-integrated, harmonious way. They're simply messengers. They're not right. They're not wrong. They're not destructive or constructive. They're not good or bad. They're simply messengers. Every emotion, whether it's grief, sadness, happiness, joy, they're all here to serve us.
Makes a lot of sense. So it's not, they can be observed. It's not about avoiding certain emotions or picking and choosing what emotions we pay attention to, but being aware of all of them and kind of coming to terms with all of it.
Exactly. And the moment we begin to repress or avoid or defend against an emotion, we can feel it in our body. There's a contraction in our belly, our shoulders tighten, our jaw tightens. Yoga at one level is introducing us to our body so we can feel these feedback mechanisms of contraction. And when we start to contract in some way, we're then immediately scanning for where might I be avoiding a particular feeling, emotion, where might I be starting to repress a kind of a feeling that I have. And then it's teaching this skillfulness. How do I have skillfulness in my speech and in my actions so that I can bring these emotions out and utilize them in ways that help me stay in harmony with myself, stay in connection with the person I'm communicating with. So at the end of the day, we should feel today was a good day, and I did this really well, and I don't have anything left over, so I can go to sleep in peace.
Yeah. Is this something that you're always continuously working on for yourself, and how do you do that? How can we work on that on a daily basis? Does it just start with awareness?
Well, when I first was learning yoga and meditation, I thought of them as these practices I did, and that was it. Now I've come to realize that the practice is just the beginning. It's how we take it into our daily life. So meditation and yoga now for me is 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 60 minutes an hour. Wow. So they're practices that actually embed into our life, and we're living them and they're living us now as organic processes. And so I've come to embrace them in every moment, and they've really helped me become sensitive. So in the moment, if I feel some contraction or my shoulders begin to tighten or my jaw begins to tighten, I can sense it at more and more subtle levels and immediately begin asking, okay, what's going on here? Where is an emotion coming up to me or some action I need to engage? And when I engage it, oh, my jaw just relaxed, my shoulders drop, my stomach feels at ease, and I'm taking an authentic action in a way and speaking truth. And I'm doing it in a kind and compassionate way, so hopefully the person in front of me isn't reacting, or if they are, I'm not reacting to them. And Buddha had a very beautiful saying. He said, it isn't the first arrow that causes the problem, it's the second and third arrow. So the first arrow might be a feeling of irritation or anger we have. It's our reaction to the anger, that we're angry because we're angry, and then we get angry because we're angry because we're angry. Or we avoid the suffering. That's the second arrow, our avoidance and our inability to meet the moment. I've come to deeply appreciate that I feel within us, we each have a unique response to every moment. And every moment within ourselves, we have the ability to sense that response. And when we engage it, there's a continuous feeling of harmony. When we don't, we'll start to feel disharmony. It's very simple teaching then. Disharmony, harmony, which do you want?
And that's what I love about how you describe it. It is very simple what you're offering and how you're bringing everything together, even some of the more complex psychology and psychodynamics, just looking at the purpose they serve. And another thing that I like, not only blending the Eastern philosophies with the traditional Western approach, but also the mind and body connection, kind of putting together what's going on mentally or emotionally and how that is translated throughout the body. So I'm curious to know, Yoga Nidra, this is kind of like the foundation of the integrative approach, the integrative restoration. So what is Yoga Nidra, and why has that become the foundation?
Well, if we look at the teachings of yoga, which to me help us realize this integrated way of living in the world where we feel both in harmony with ourselves and the world around us, the teachings that help us actually embody that, embrace that. The word Nidra means sleep, but it means a changing state of consciousness. So either sleep, awake, happy, sad, in dream, or dreamless sleep, awake or asleep. So Yoga Nidra are actually a series of practices we engage so that we feel in harmony and we might say awake, no matter the changing state of consciousness that we are in the moment. And so that means the body could be in great pain physically or distress emotionally or psychically. We could be awake or we could be in sleep, and there's something in us that feels at harmony, at peace with whatever is arising. So these are very deep and timeless practices that have been honed over centuries. And I feel they are the underlying principles behind every contemplative tradition in the world, because I've traced them back to where they began in the parts of Persia in 5, 6, 10,000 BC, where then they divided and they went east and west, and they went west into the Greek teachings, the Roman teachings, and now what we know as the Western world, and Aristotle and Plato and all of them. And over in the East, it entered into India, became the teachings of Patanjali, Advaita, Kashmir Shaivism, and then Buddhism, and then emerged up into China as Chan and Japan as Zen. So the teachings of Yoga Nidra, as I've come to appreciate them, actually are these very simple principles that are embodied in all these different teachings. So I was first introduced to them in 1970. I got very involved in studying them, and along the way all these other traditions, and really looking at the skeleton of, say, the teachings of Yoga Nidra, where I could hang all these different books, whether it was the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita from the East, the Bible or New Testament, or the Book of Islam on the West. And they're very simple core principles.
What are some of those principles? I've heard you mentioned the pieces that constitute the philosophies of Yoga Nidra. Are you able to kind of run us through those?
Yeah, look at they're just 10 simple principles that can be filled out in ever deepening levels. But the 10 core principles, every journey starts with an intention. So whether we're starting out on building a house, we're starting out on a journey somewhere, or we're starting out on sitting for meditation, it's an intention. So what is our intention? And then what is our deepest heartfelt desire as a result of these practices? What is it that we wish to accomplish? So if we were looking back on our life from our deathbed, how would we like to say we've lived life? And I think most people would say, I'd like to look back at my life that I lived as a kind, compassionate, loving human being, authentic. And so we, right from the beginning, try to identify what's our core intention, and then what are the small intentions that are helping us realize that. So that might be a daily meditation practice, eating for health, going to bed at a certain time and waking up at a certain time. So what are the little daily practices? And then the third component in this initial stage is, can we find within ourselves this inner sanctuary, safe haven where we feel a deep sense of wholeness and peace and well-being that's unbreakable? So once we kind of ground in that, and I understand that while they're simple, they can take time to do that. Then we have the next two phases, body sensing and using the breath. These are helping us awaken the body to very subtle cues and feedback mechanisms so that we can catch the early signs when we're beginning to go away and going into disharmony. And it also helps restore the body to a certain quality of wellness and health and wholeness, just physically. And then the next two pieces are dealing with our emotions and our thoughts, images, experiences. How do we learn to befriend our emotions and our beliefs and our thoughts and the experiences we have, again, that are helping us be an integrated whole human being psychologically, we might say. The next piece, awakening a quality of joy and well-being in ourselves that, again, I would say is unbreakable. And then the next piece, awakening to this larger essence that connects us to the entire universe. And the final piece, taking it into the world. How do we integrate this into every relationship and circumstance we're going to find ourselves in, whether we're at peace and feeling great, or when the daily life knocks us off balance, we find ourselves in pain, illness, or old age, sickness, or moving towards the dying process. So how do we embody these different principles, the intention, the heartfelt desire, this inner resource of grounded, unbreakable wellness, our relationship to our body, our emotions, our thoughts, and joy? How do we integrate this into every circumstance? So 10 basic practices.
That's amazing.
Very simple.
Yeah, thanks for running us through those. That's really profound, but really practical and all-encompassing in the way to kind of lead a harmonious life within ourselves and within our environment.
Well, I like it because long ago I realized I had people coming to me, I call them the choir. They just want to learn these. Mm-hmm. But how do I bring them to other people who otherwise wouldn't think of learning these? So I started reaching out to people in homeless shelters, veterans, children, different interest groups that wouldn't approach these kind of teachings on their own, and trying to see, could I come into their centers, their different places of where they were gathered, and teach them these principles. And lo and behold, they got really turned on, began to utilize them in their lives, and began to heal. So the veterans, through their post-traumatic stress, chronic pain, helping them deal with their issues of chronic illness or depression or traumatic brain injury, the homeless, helping them restore their sense of well-being and get back on their feet, people in chemical dependency, helping them get back on their feet and be resilient in their ability to deal with the addictions, the tendencies. And then right now we're coming and working with women and men who've been rescued from human trafficking, helping them get back on their feet.
Wow.
Again, very core, simple, secular practices anybody can engage and learn quickly. And I've appreciated that most people have come at the end of a class and said, gosh, this is so simple. I realize I've just been dismissing the simplicity of it, and it's so helpful that actually this is the first time I've slept through the night.
Wow.
In years.
That's amazing. It's just it's amazing how you've been able to put these things together and form something integrative. And then what's also exciting about your work is being able to go out and be curious enough to validate them and apply them and develop some feedback, and which kind of generates into the science and research, which has become a huge part of what you're doing. So, but this goes back to kind of the basic realization of if we're all connected, then I'm not whole until everyone is whole. So it's kind of compassion is what led you to help other people.
Well, you're talking about what's called the Great Vow, which is as we heal ourselves into our sense of wholeness, and we realize that everyone around us, in a way, is an extension of the underlying wholeness that has given birth to ourself. We realize until everyone's healed, I'm not fully healed or whole. And that's called the Great Vow. Buddha, they call it the Bodhisattva vow. I vow to bring an end to suffering to all sentient and insentient beings. And as you said, I said so beautifully, we can feel whole within ourselves, but when we look around at the suffering of the world, we feel moved compassionately to help. Because in a way we're serving ourself, we're healing another aspect of ourself out there in the so-called other.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's amazing. And so leading into iRest and Integrative Restoration, where was it? What was the first step for you in applying this and helping other people? I know you have a background in clinical psychology, so you've been in the trenches, kind of in psychology, working with people. But in terms of this application, was it with veterans?
Originally, actually, I had a yoga center. I was doing my psychotherapy practice. I was still practicing Chinese medicine and acupuncture for a while. That dropped away around 1982 or 3. But we started offering classes for people with multiple sclerosis because a number of the clientele who were coming to my yoga studio had MS. So we started offering classes for MS, and we had very, very high rates of success with people feeling a sense of well-being, a sense of being able to navigate this difficult life illness. And then I began to wonder, well, what about other subgroups? So I was reaching out to people who are having sleep issues, and I ran some groups with people with sleep issues, and again had very great success. In 2004, the military came to me and asked, could I work with veterans with PTSD, which I did. Had great success, and now we're in over 85 military settings across the United States, coming also into Canada, Australia, and England. Then I got engaged with several homeless shelters and started to bring it into the homeless shelters. Then I thought, well, what about kids? And one of my students was teaching kindergarten kids, so we developed a whole program for 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And then I thought, well, what about 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So we got in some studies going in a university setting, working with college students, inner city schools, high school kids, elementary and middle school kids with great success. And then a few years back, I was introduced to the work of a friend of mine who was working with human trafficking, Jeffrey Brown and some others, and got very involved in seeing could this work help those. And now we're coming into Mumbai, Calcutta, and Nepal, Kathmandu, teaching survivors to become teachers themselves, who in turn will spread the teachings to others. I've been graced with good fortune that these have come to my table, and I've created a nonprofit, the Integrative Restoration Institute. So we basically are a training institute. We train teachers to then in turn move these teachings into the world, but we also offer immersions, workshops, and retreats for people who just want to learn the practices themselves. And to date, I've trained over 3,000 teachers worldwide who are bringing these teachings into their communities, and thousands of people who brought it into their own life as their own daily practice.
It's amazing. Yeah, this is something that all of us can benefit from, but in terms of the research and development, what a great place to start with these kind of extreme cases, PTSD, homelessness. And,
well, for years, Jeremy, I went to bed reading the medical literature and the research, and I began to realize, while I could gain access to it, a lot of meditation teachers, yoga teachers, and students didn't know how to gain access or didn't know that this material was available. So in the early 80s, with a friend of mine, Larry Payne, I started the International Association of Yoga Therapists, and now what has become a peer-reviewed journal where all of this medical literature can be accessible. Then I got involved in research myself, because I realized unless we're able to prove that these techniques work to the Western audience, they're not going to fly. Mm-hmm. So as a Westerner, I don't want somebody telling me, trust me. I want to actually show the proof. So I began to get involved in research. To date, I've done over 35 research studies with post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, sleep, children, adults, young adults, children, showing that this work can really be helpful. And I think that's really what's spreading the teachings, and people are accessing it now. And I mean, I was just watching Jeopardy, which my wife loves, on television, and they have a question about what's a good methodology for helping people who are having sleep problems, and lo and behold, what was the answer? Yoga Nidra.
Wow.
That's on national television.
And
then last night on, I think it was 60 Minutes, they were talking, or no, it was on the national news, ABC News, a study that what is as good as physical therapy for healing somebody's back problems? Yoga. So it has infiltrated the culture, but because of the research that we've done. And we now can show definitively that normally when people are just sitting quietly with themselves, they're in their default network of recursive negative thinking for the most part. Mm-hmm. Whereas meditation puts them right into a whole nother network in their nervous system where they begin to feel a sense of peace, ease, and well-being, and are able to drop out of negative thinking and cultivate and nourish really healthy thinking. And then we're able to show that over time, their brain actually grows and thickens the structures that help them maintain a sense of equanimity and peace, where they're no longer held hostage by negative thinking, and they can step out of their past conditioning behaviors really into new, wonderful ways of being. And we're actually able to show it at a real-time level that's happening in their nervous system. So the research is certainly driving these teachings forward in our modern era.
Yeah. So what was some of that preliminary research in terms of, because even those results that you just described are pretty amazing, have amazing implications for us on an individual level, just on a daily basis. But for some of those more traumatic emotions or traumatic wounds, PTSD, for example, what was some of that preliminary research coming out in terms of that?
Well, the research was initially looking at stress and what is its effect on the human body. And what we see is, one, it disconnects people from themselves over time, and it can disconnect them from the world around them. So they feel very alienated, isolated, and they begin to get depression, and they don't sleep well, and life's not going so great. Then we looked at PTSD, and we actually saw the same thing happening. And when we looked at people under long-time stress, say in their workplace, or people who were experiencing PTSD, we actually saw structures in their brain, the amygdala, the limbic system, enlarging. So people would feel held hostage by their emotions. Well, indeed, the very structures that force them to feel held hostage by, say, anger or depression or sleeplessness were actually thickening and growing due to their life circumstances, while the other structures, the hippocampus and other places, were actually shrinking. So the feel-good hormones weren't as available to them. When we did studies with meditation, we saw those amygdala structures shrinking back to normal size, and the hippocampus and others actually regrowing to normal size. Their neocortex, which is their executive control where we make decisions and are able to make right decisions, that actually began to thicken and grow and become enhanced. And then the people in the studies reported as they were meditating feelings of equanimity, connectedness. So we were seeing both real time and over long term people reporting in meditation through their practices. And what are we talking about? 10 minutes, 20 minutes a day, say 5 times a week, over, say, 18 weeks, we actually got hard changes in the brain that were sustainable. So we're not talking about huge amounts of time. So we saw very quickly that meditation was actually changing the brain, reorganizing and integrating the nervous system, and inducing the very skills that people need to navigate these difficult circumstances. And I've been very fortunate to watch people with long-term severe post-traumatic stress, both from war, from car accidents, plane crashes, or major illnesses like cancer or multiple sclerosis, actually recapture a sense of well-being and come to this major discovery that these practices over time, at first they feel like they're having to do them. There comes a moment where the practices are now doing us and doing them. So they may feel an old pattern, like an addictive tendency starting to come up. And the meditation now is built into their system, these structures that help them navigate and not get caught up in the old behaviors. So we're having great success with addiction, whether it's chemical, sexual addiction, gambling. But hey, I think the widest worldwide addiction that everybody suffers from is thinking. Everybody's addicted to negative thinking, and we're helping them produce positive thoughts and break the addiction to negative thinking and create a new positive addiction to feeling good and navigating their life in healthy manners. So it's fun to see the actual hard science. When you look at a brain that has actually changed and you can see it from 1 week and 6 weeks later actually see the brain having grown, that's incredible.
That's fantastic. And yeah, that's really fascinating. So in terms of what has surprised you working with other people, seeing maybe some of those more extreme cases, because this is something that depression and stress, this is something that modern psychology kind of struggles with, right?
You know, the most immediate response I would say that has struck me so deeply is I hear all the time in the first class I give for veterans with severe post-traumatic stress, or people in homeless shelters, or the people who've been rescued from trafficking and been through horrendous experiences. In the first class, I'll hear this: I feel like I just came home to myself. I feel more connected. Vietnam veterans, this is people who are decades beyond their war experience. They say, I've had the first night's complete sleep since I was in Vietnam. Or one fellow came to us and said, I don't know what's happening here, but the pain I've had for 12 years is gone. How could that be? So we're providing life skills that people can have immediate results with: sleep through the night, help deal with their chronic or acute pain, deal with the depression that all of a sudden starts to either go away or instills, as one woman said. She said, after the first session, the well-being that you helped me discover slowly faded over the next few days, but it instilled within me a sense of hope that there is a way out of my depression. And now, several years later, that depression is well in the past, and she's back in her fully functioning life with her job and her children. So we can help people restore a sense of hope, then a sense of trust and faith that, hey, I can reclaim my life, and I can get a good night's sleep, and I can navigate these difficult life circumstances that I may have chronic pain for the rest of my life, but I know how to work with it now. It's not leading me to feel depressed and hopeless. So really practical life skills.
Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, I just have a couple more questions, but so one thing that struck me is, how would you describe trauma? What is trauma? And you just mentioned somebody was dealing with pain, and that awareness was able to, the pain kind of just drops away, or they were able to transcend it. So what are these people dealing with in terms of trauma and pain? How would you describe that?
Trauma, when we're in a difficult situation, our body is trying to process and integrate and move through the information that's coming into our body. Now, that might be somebody shouting at us at work. It might be that we're in grave illness like cancer, or our best friend or our lover or our spouse or a child has cancer, say, and we're being overwhelmed, or in an act of war, an explosive device goes off. Our body is designed to recognize and bring in that information, whether it's an explosion going off or an illness, and then to process it. If the information is overwhelming, what the body does is it stores it so that we can survive the situation and then come back later and reprocess that information. But when too much information comes in and then it keeps coming in, our system gets overwhelmed, we store it, and now we have trauma. And it can be post-traumatic trauma where it's lasting over days, weeks, months, even years or decades. The principles of Yoga Nidra, say, and meditation in general are designed to help us reprocess that information in a way to shake it off so that we can come back, process the information that we couldn't at the time of the injury, integrate it, and then surpass it and move on. So now we're not just surviving, but we're actually back to thriving in the world. And we see in nature animals when they've been attacked, say a gazelle by a tiger or by a lion, and they're able to escape, they sit there and they shudder and they shake. And basically what they're doing is they're shaking off the trauma. We as human beings are designed to do the same thing, but because of our culture, we're often locked into not shaking it off. We're told when we're starting to grieve, get over it, or when we're getting angry to not be angry or suppress it. We're learning through meditation skills that are helping us really go back, locate that information, and that's why body and breath sensing are so important. They help us locate it at the bodily level. Then the processes of working with emotions, sensations, and thoughts are helping us process it with really life-enhancing tools, and meeting and reawakening the sense of wholeness, wellness, and indestructible well-being that then we can utilize so we really can say to ourselves, I feel like I'm back home with myself, and I can go back into life thriving now and really do life in a way that I really wasn't able to before, because any kind of trauma is actually asking us to stop, because we need to process through this information that wasn't able to be processed at the time that it came into our body. So yoga is an incredible way, and we're seeing in the research that long-term trauma, even short-term trauma, changes the body and the nervous system, the immunological system. Yoga, meditation, and Yoga Nidra bring the immunological system back online, regrow the brain properly, and help the nervous system, the vagal nervous system, really learn how to process this information so we can actually be free of the trauma. and to the trauma that maybe we got when we were early on, and we may live with elements of it because it was so deeply stored in their body. As it comes to the surface over our rest of our life, we now have the tools with which to meet it, greet it, bring it in, process it, metabolize it, and grow through those elements and do that with the next piece. So I liken our humanness to kind of like, one of those little Pez containers that we grew up with. You open the little mouth and a little Pez candy comes up, and then you close it and you do it again in the next Pez. Well, I think of that as these traumas. They're embodied in our system. And when we handle one through the processes of meditation, the next one will come up. And one day we may see that we're done. There are no more Pez in the machine, and we keep putting it down and picking up, and there are no more traumas. Other people, they'll pick it up a couple of days later and somebody loaded new Pez into it. It's like they're these stored trauma that keep coming up over our life. But now we have the tools with really which to meet them and heal, keep healing all the way through our life.
Exactly, and that's what I was going to get to next. This is a process, and this is a practice and a discipline that needs to be maintained. It's not just kind of dealing with the problem and then moving on. This is something that is integrated into the way we live so that we can bring it into the way we live. So for you, what is your meditation practice become?
Yeah, and it's why I call my institute the Integrative Restoration Institute, because as you said, we're learning to integrate and restore. So integrate these different tools and restore the sense of well-being. And interesting, the military, when I first started with Yoga Nidra, they said, hey, yoga's for sissies, call it something else. So we called it Integrative Restoration, iRest. I for helping the I kind of rest back and restore these practices. My own practice, I think, is like what I'm teaching, and I like to think of these as practices for life, and little and often, but I start my day by remembering this sense of wholeness, and then moving with it as I move into my first cup of tea. And then I tend to do a little body sensing, working with the breath to keep sensitizing my body and nourishing the sense of well-being. And then I engage, are there any emotions that are present, any thoughts that need to be met and greeted and welcomed and integrated? And then I spend some time nourishing joy. And then I take a little bit of time just to sit and kind of immerse myself like you would immerse yourself in a bathtub of being and well-being until it infuses through my whole body, and then take that into my day. And that can be as simple as a 10 or a 15, 20-minute practice that I do every day. When I have a lot of leisure, I might take an hour to an hour and a half. But then I'm taking it all day long and doing that all day long as I go through my day. And that's what I'm teaching my students and the people I work with, how to have, like I call them, little mini practices that are actually pragmatic. I help them tailor the practice to their life and their lifestyle and how they have time during their day. And so we've got to make these accessible, easily learnable, easily rememberable. And as you pointed out, these are lifetime practices. I love the root word of discipline, which is actually love of learning. So I think the things I think of, what is going to motivate me? Deep curiosity, the love of learning, and then I call them the 3 Ps: patience, persistence, and perseverance, over and over and over again on a daily level, moment to moment. And I realized they've made my life into a really stellar, deeply peaceful way of living life. I have my challenges. I've had people die who are close to me. I've had illnesses. I've had major chronic pain at times, and yet this practice has stood me in stead throughout all those experiences where I've been able to take my car, my body, you might say, my life, for a test drive, and I must say the practices work. And now I've been privy to see the practices work for thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and it's exciting to I was with a person the other day. She had been electrocuted several years ago, was in a coma, and for the last 2 years has gotten maybe 3-4 hours sleep a night, has always felt fatigued. And after her first practice, she came to me with tears flooding down her face saying, I got the first night of sleep after such a simple practice. I couldn't believe what happened. So to see again a simple practice, 20 minutes, and here's a person having a life-altering change that she sees restores a sense of hope for her life, that she can actually overcome the trauma that happened to her.
It's really unbelievable, and it's the transformations that take place, and the simplicity of it is really stunning. It's funny because you mentioned how the military, for example, was saying yoga is for sissies, but it's
Right.
in terms of meditation, I think, is kind of the ultimate form of mental toughness. And
Yes.
there's this misconception about how it's all, you sit with yourself, you observe, and then you're immediately in the clouds and it's all great. But it's actually it's a tough practice. And there was this research, these articles that I was reading recently where they're doing research and they're starting to show a lot of the negative experiences that are involved in meditation. Yeah.
I tell people the first few weeks or months of doing yoga or meditate, God, you're going to feel so great, but it's slowly opening the door to your unconscious. And so we want to give you the keys and the tools with which you're going to need to meet these experiences, so that, meditation after a while is going to show us all of our repressions, all of our things we've not wanted to deal with, but it's going to give us the tools with which to deal with them. And I tell people how much psychic energy is being bound up within you to keep all these old feelings, emotions repressed. What if you were able to release these long-held traumas, physical issues in your body, emotions that you've never dealt with, deal with them, and so that you recapture all that incredible energy so that you can live life more in its fullness and what it's meant to be, and turn on your immune system so you can heal through fibromyalgia or immunological issues, or help you deal with your cancer. So I recognize meditation, while it can at first feel very benign and really life-enhancing, it's going to open doors to help you really become a functional human being, which means dealing with these emotions and thoughts that you were hoping you'd never have to deal with again in your life, but giving you the tools with which to do that.
And it's going to be tough. It might be painful. It might even be scary at times, but that is the reward, is that the reward is the practice itself of the result of having come face to face with some of these emotions. And
we're trying to offer people, say, through my institute, both the teachings, the workshops, the community, and the teachers with which they can feel a sense of support and help keep nourishing that sense of curiosity, persistence, patience, perseverance, and the willingness to stick to it. It can be hard at times, and any challenging life circumstance, whether it's insomnia, depression, addiction, these are real life difficulties.
Oh, yeah.
But we're learning the practice with which to navigate them, and we need the community, we need the support system, we need the books and the teachings and the practices we can do at 2 a.m. in the morning because we've got them on our computer or our phone or our iPad. So we're trying to be really practical, but as you're pointing out, it does take a certain courage, desire, and that's why we start with the intention. What's your intention here? What do you want more than anything else in the world that's going to bring happiness to your life? So that intention is really, really important, and we keep nourishing it all the way through the practices.
That's great, yeah. And I like to say, like, anything worth having in life is always going to be challenging, and that includes a life worth living. And being able to work through these traumatic experiences, even just sitting alone with yourself can be a scary experience because it's something that we don't usually do. We don't sit in silence with ourselves, and which makes it tough.
There was a study done a number of years ago. People who were willing every day or on a regular basis to entertain a little bit of negativity had more resilience, more well-being, and less depression than people who are trying to be happy all the time.
That's great.
So in our practice, we nourish both the happy feelings and the sense of joy and well-being, and we desire to bring up these more negative aspects, we might call them, and learn how to navigate them. And so people learn a deep sense of resiliency and ability to navigate their life. Avoiding discomfort is just going to bring more discomfort. Our willingness to experience discomfort teaches us how to be with it, and so we feel more comfortable, paradoxically.
Yeah, absolutely. So after touching on so many different philosophies, working with so many different people, what do you've touched on it throughout this conversation, which has been very fascinating, but what do you know for sure, just in a few words, about happiness?
Happiness is a core innate quality in every single cell in our body. We're primed towards happiness. We're primed to move away from that which gives us dissatisfaction and move towards that which gives us satisfaction and pleasure. So happiness is an innate, inherent quality in all of us. It's been encultured out of us, sometimes by family, by culture, by personal experiences, but it's able to be recaptured, nourished, and brought back into the forefront of our experience in moment to moment. It's simple to recognize. I know it takes time to nourish it and bring it fully foreground, but it's a capacity that we all have. I've seen people who've gone through horrendous issues, even from birth and even when they were in the womb, who suffered tremendous abuse, recapture a sense of happiness and well-being and begin to thrive in their life. So I know that anybody can do it. It just takes intention, practice, perseverance, and patience, but it's innate and it's ready to be restored at any moment.
Well said. Thank you so much for that. That's beautiful. So, what are you excited about right now? What are you working on, and where can people learn more about what you've been up to?
I'm excited because I've got 15 well-qualified senior trainers now in the field, as well as all these 3,000 teachers. So our institute is providing more and more trainings worldwide. I really love teaching retreats where I bring people on for 4, 7, 10-day retreats to really help them embody these skills, not just learn them intellectually. And I'm excited because I'm writing quite a book on meditation that I'm looking forward to being out in a couple of years, where I'm really showcasing these principles. I already have 2 books out that showcase them, but an even deeper, more inclusive book. And I'm putting together right now a 3-year training in meditation that's different from the iRest teachings, which I think of as the foundational teachings, and then the deeper teachings that my meditation retreats show. So I'm excited. I'm passing on the legacy. It's like I'm not just paying forward, but I'm realizing now I can begin to step out of the game as I get older.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a whole host of people coming forward who are going to, I'm basically saying, tag, you're it, and they're in turn going to say, tag, they're it, and hopefully this just keeps continuing on into the decades to follow.
Yeah, that is exciting. Good work. I mean, it's been really...
There's one more thing. I think I love the research, and we're really investigating now what are best practices. So, I have a wonderful protocol, but if I look at what are the best practices that, from my perspective, or Buddhism or Christianity or Judeo-Christian perspectives, I'm really excited about our ability to study what are best practices and to actually see them in action through the neuroscience. Once we see them in the neuroscience, how might we educate people through practices to actually do what we're seeing happening in the MRI and the research studies, so that we can make these practices even simpler, more engaging, and hopefully more and more effective in shorter and shorter periods of time. That said, they're still going to take time to practice. Very
cool. Very cool. Very looking forward to that. So for the listeners, I really recommend checking out the website. It's iRest.us. Is that correct?
Correct. iRest, IREST US,
Great.
and we've got free downloads for sleep and for well-being, as well as a portal to our books and CDs and MP3 downloads that people can access, and of course all of our events, trainings, workshops, immersions, and retreats.
Oh yeah, all the research is on there as well, very dense and rich with information. That's what kind of drew me in a couple years ago when I came across it. I was actually looking up Yoga Nidra, and that's what led me to iRest, which is amazing, because I think a lot of the work you've done has had a large impact on the way that this type of practice is being perceived, not only philosophically but physically and like clinically as well, which is just unreal.
Yeah, and when we see it coming on television shows
Exactly,
like
yeah.
Jeopardy, we know it's out into the
for
public.
sure.
And our website is also providing gateways to our work in Europe, in Australia, Asia, and into Canada as well.
Really unbelievable. So thanks so much for the work you do. I really commend you. I really respect it, and I really appreciate you joining us today and sharing this with us. So thanks again, Dr. Richard.
Well, thanks, Jeremy. It's gateways like yours, too, that are helping spread this teaching into the world. So my thanks and kudos go to you as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Great. Thanks so much, Richard.